Well, welcome back to our series, All You Can, and I want to welcome and give a big happy Thanksgiving to our Coweta and Sapulpa campuses, and maybe for those of you that are watching this online. I'm so glad you've been aboard with us on this All You Can series. We've taken the name of that from an old John Wesley sermon who preached back in the 18th century, and he preached a sermon on the use of money one time, and he talked about earning all you can and saving all you can and giving all you can. And so we've just kind of adopted that terminology. And so over the last couple of weeks, just to recap, week number one was just kind of an introduction. We looked in Luke chapter 12 at the story of the rich fool, a man that really didn't pay attention. He came into good times and he spent it all on himself. He hoarded all his money. He made everything about himself. He wasn't rich toward God. And the reminder is that this is all God's anyway. Everything that we have is God's. It's on loan to us. We're stewards. And so last week we talked about the idea of earning all you can. We looked at another story of Jesus from Luke chapter 16. It's called this parable of the shrewd servant. And we looked at this particular person who knew that he was losing his job. And so he extended a lot of grace to some people. And he used that to prepare a future for him. And we talked about some lessons from that money's good, that money is temporary, that money's on loan to us, again, that we're just stewards of it. But most of all, it has to do with our use of money, that money can be used for some really good things. So earn all you can, gain all you can, but certainly use it for some good purposes. Today we're going to be talking about save all you can. And that is probably something that our culture really needs to hear because we are not savers. In fact, I think it was CNBC that reported this Go Bank rates survey that was done. This is a 2017 survey, and they found that 39% of people have zero in their savings. They have no savings account. There's nothing. This is 39% of Americans surveyed here. Then if you go to less than $1,000, another 18% have less than $1,000, which means this, that 57% of Americans have less than or no savings account, less than $1,000 or nothing in a savings account. The good news is that that's much better than where we were last year. 69% had less than $1,000 in a savings account. And so maybe we need to change the title of this from Save All You Can to Start Saving Something. So if you've got your Bible, I want you to turn to Matthew 25, or maybe you've got a phone or device that you've got a Bible app on. Matthew 25, we'll be there in just a second. Let me give you a little context of this. Jesus is telling stories to his disciples, and it is all about the kingdom of heaven. He is telling them that it will happen soon. It will happen one of these days, and you need to be prepared. And so the story that we're going to read is tucked between one that's called the parable of the 10 virgins. There were some wise ladies that showed up at a wedding, and then there were some that were not so wise. Some were prepared with extra oil for their lamps, some were not. And again, it's about preparation for the kingdom of heaven. After the story, Jesus is going to tell another one. It's called the story of the sheep and goats. And there were some that were faithful in this life and did what Jesus thought and expected of them, and like they did it to Jesus themselves, and there were others that weren't. And it's talking again about there being a judgment at the kingdom. Now, what we're going to talk about, the story that we're going to read beginning in verse 14, is not necessarily about money. Again, it is about being prepared for the future, specifically our eternity. But Jesus is going to use money as a part of the lesson, and so we're going to take some principles from that. Matthew chapter 25, verse 14, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability, and then he went on his journey. So it was common for a wealthy person in those days to take a long journey. Maybe it was a business trip. Maybe it was just to do some sightseeing, but it was not an uncommon thing. And before they would leave, they would arrange to have someone, pick up the mail and take care of the pets while they were gone. But even more than that, they would delegate the management of their wealth, and they would do that to their trustworthy employees. They would find somebody that could manage those things while they were going to be gone for an extended amount of time. And those employees were expected to bring a return on what had been handed over to them. Now, because of the uncertainty of transportation, it wasn't like you could decide, when you were going to be arriving and departing, those kinds of things. The master wasn't able to tell them when he would be back. He just trusted them, and so they didn't know exactly when the master would return. But this they did know, that this was not their stuff, that it was the master's and it still belonged to him. They were the possessors of the time, but they weren't the owners. Their job was just to manage what was given. And so let's start by just saying this, that God has generously entrusted you with his resources. Let's just take that from the passage there, that we can understand that Jesus explains that everything that we have is actually God's, that he has just temporarily entrusted us with resources to use. We may already know that, but occasionally, I know, at least for me, I need to be reminded of it. I am just a manager. It is all God's. And so we've got to quit treating money and stuff as if it belongs to us, as if it's ours. In fact, what that does is it makes every spending decision for us really a spiritual decision. The problem that we're going to see through this story is that one of these employees, one of the managers that is going to have some of this money of the master's, is going to use that bag of gold as he saw fit, not as his master saw fit. He saw himself as a manager, but he's doing it as he would do it. He was treating it as his own, not like the owner would treat it. So it's all God's anyway. It's all his, and we need to start using what we have in our possession like it's his. Here's the problem. I think a lot of church people, a lot of Christians kind of think of it this way, that, well, yeah, I've got all of this stuff, all of my money, and 10% of it belongs to God, and the rest of it, the 90%, it belongs to me, and I can do whatever I want to with it. But the Bible teaches us really something different. The Bible teaches us that 100% of our stuff, our goods, our possessions, our money, 100% of it belongs to God. And we are just responsible for that. We're not only responsible for how we use and give the first 10% of that, but we're also responsible for what happens with the other 90% of the money that God allows us to acquire in our lives. We are just managers. We have been entrusted with his resources. Notice this also from the story, that God does not evenly distribute his resources. God does not evenly distribute. In the story, Jesus tells, the master gives the servants different amounts of money. We're told each according to their ability. So to one he gave 5, to another gave 2, to another he gave 1. You have what you have because God gave it to you, and he expects you to use it and to manage it as he would see fit. Now, he trusts different amounts to different people because he knows how much we can manage. And so what he expects from you is something you can handle because he gave it to you. He knows more about us than we know about ourselves. So whatever amount that God has given you, you work with it. That's what you've been entrusted with. And we have to realize that God has specifically chosen what he has entrusted us with. And since God is the giver, we have to trust his judgment with our ability. So the story teaches us that it's not about how much you have. It's really about how you use it. It's about what you do with what you have been entrusted with. See, a lot of people have this great plan that when they get their financial picture together, when things kind of fall into place, after we get to a certain point, after business gets to a certain level, after we buy the home, whatever, that then we're going to start investing our treasures in the kingdom. Then we're going to start doing the things that we need to do with our money. But the story teaches us it's not about what you will do in the future if your allotment increases. It's all about what you do with what you've been given now. So make sure you get this. We want to be entrusted with more. If I just had more, then I could be more faithful. But Jesus' principle is this: First, be faithful with what you have if you want to be trusted with more. In fact, the interesting point the story makes is that God does repeat business with those who have proved faithful. We see that in the story. Let's go on. The man who had received 5 bags, remember that first servant, the one that received 5 bags, he went at once and put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, he dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. So you got these 3 different servants. The master's already left. They began to kind of take their own strategies and what they're going to do. And the one with 5 makes 5 more. The one with 2, you get the idea right here. Verse 19 tells us after a long time, we're not given any kind of specifics there, but at some point, the master of those servants returned. We can assume that there was really no warning. He just shows up one day and he settled accounts with them. It's time to kind of draw everything to a conclusion here. How did you do? And what we find over the next few verses is that the man who was given 5, he actually made 5 more. And the boss is going to, he's going to tell the boss that. And the boss is going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been, successful with a few things. The person that was given 2, sure enough, he tells the boss, listen, I made 2 bags more of gold. And again, the idea of well done, good and faithful servant. But the one we're told that hid his bag of gold in the ground, he retrieved it for the master, and he brought it back, and he says, listen, I know you're a hard guy, and I know you don't want to lose money, and because of that, I was afraid, and so I hid it in the ground, and so here it is back for you. Well, the man is called wicked, and he's called lazy, and the master says, at the least, you could have put your money in the bank. You could have put my money in the bank and could have drawn some interest on that. And ultimately, we're told that servant is thrown out. So let's just take this into account. God will hold you accountable for his resources. The things that he's entrusted with you, he will come back and he will hold you accountable for those resources. Jesus tells us it's not enough just to avoid financial pitfall, that we just hide it in the ground, that we've got to be intentional with what we have, with what we've been entrusted. You've been given something to manage, and so whatever you do, don't let it just be managed by chance. Don't just hope things will fall into place accidentally. You be intentional. Because here's the crazy thing. I talk with people all the time who are intentional about all areas of their life. They're intentional about their career. They have a game plan. They're intentional about their parenting. They're intentional about their hobbies. They spend money. They make goals. They set out plans. But when it comes to managing God's money, oftentimes people feel powerless, like it's out of their control. So when this parable is about preparation for eternity, and it's speaking about it specifically with the management of resources, one of the intentional things that we do with our money is to save a portion of it. In fact, that's what Jesus said, that the manager said to that, or the owner said to that lazy servant, the least you could have done was put the money in the bank, and I would have made some interest on it. You could have at least saved some of it. And so we're talking today about save all you can. Use your money. Use it for good. Use it as a tool. Use your money. Don't let your money use you. In fact, let me use this as a definition that I've kind of taken from the story here, and obviously it speaks specifically to this story. Saving is not hoarding or burying. That's what that last servant did. He buried his money. He was afraid he would lose it, so he just completely buried it where nobody he thought could get it. Obviously, there's still a risk there. It's not hoarding. That's what would have been like the rich fool did. He put it behind just for himself. Saving is not hoarding or burying, but saving is preparing for the future. That's the definition of saving. Financially, it's preparing for the future. For maybe that time when you can't work, either because of some injury or some illness, or maybe just ultimately aging and retirement. It's preparing for the future when something is going to break down. It's preparing for the future when something needs to be replaced, or when we have some kind of difficulty. We need some money in savings. In fact, the Bible talks often about it. Listen to this Proverbs. The wise man saves for the future. The foolish man spends whatever he gets. The wise man puts some money back. The wise man saves some money for the future because he knows there's going to be some things that are going to happen. There's going to be some things that he knows are going to happen in the future. And then there's going to be those unknown things that happen in the future. The wise man does that. The foolish man just spends it all. And if we're honest, that's the real reason why we often get into trouble, why we don't have anything in savings, is because we struggle with creating that, because we're spending everything that we get. We spend it as fast as we get, and statistics tell us we actually spend a little more than we get. We spend more money typically than we make. We put it on credit. And so there's no savings to fall back on. Have you ever stopped to consider what the future value of the money you spend today could have amounted to? The future value of the money that you could have or you might spend today, what it might add up to in the future. Here's just a simple example. Let's say you spend $10 a week on lunch at work every day. So 5 days a week, $10 for lunch on the job. I know for some of you that it adds up to way more than that. For some of you might be thinking, I don't spend near that. But let's just use $10. And what if one day a week you decided just to fast? Or one day a week you decide, I'm just going to take a bologna sandwich. I'm not going to spend that. I'm just going to take a bologna sandwich and some chips. And you save that $10 rather than spend it. Now, if you were to continue to do that over the course of the year, let's say 50 weeks at $10, I mean, that's $500. You may be thinking, well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. That's not much. But $500, if you do that not just 1 year, but you do that 20 years, that accumulates to $10,000. That becomes significant money. The future value of money. When you decide, I'm not going to spend everything that I get, I'm going to save some for the future. Or this proverb says, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Now, we're part of a culture that likes to think in terms of lump sum, right? We dream about winning the lottery. We dream about getting the settlement, or, getting some lump sum of money. But the Bible says there is something about money acquired, money saved, little by little. It doesn't mention this specifically in the Bible, but it's the idea of the law of compounding interest. The more you save, the greater the return. And the longer you save, the greater the return. You save little by little. And when you focused on a disciplined saving plan over a matter of time, it's amazing what grows. You'll realize the power of compounding interest. I used this example several years ago, and I don't remember exactly where I found it, but it's basically this. Imagine two people, Jack and Jill. And Jack gets a paper route in the second grade. He puts back $50 a month, and he has that paper route for 11 years until he graduates from high school. Over that 11-year period, he has put back $6,600. The thing is, he doesn't touch it until retirement. He graduates from high school, doesn't touch it. He doesn't put anything more into it. He doesn't take anything out of it. That's Jack's story. Jill's story is this. She really doesn't start saving until she's 25 years of age, but she makes good money, and she starts saving $2,000 a year. And so from age 25 to age 65, she puts back $2,000 a year into retirement. That's $80,000 that she saves, matched up with Jack's measly $6,600. By the time they're age 65, both of them are millionaires. But guess who has more money? Jack actually has more money than Jill, and it's all because of this law of compounding interest. When you put your money away, little by little, over time, that money grows. So save all you can. Save all you can. Maybe you're not there yet, and so let's talk about, where do you start with this? Can I just maybe give you what I would call my game plan, or maybe some things that I have practiced? One of those things is, I think you start with the most important thing: save for eternity. Save for eternity. You do that simply by giving to God. Every time you give to God, the Bible tells us that God updates our heavenly account. We're talking about an account that doesn't decrease because of market fluctuation. It's something that nobody can get into. It never has to be audited because someone might make a mistake. There doesn't need to be security or identity theft protection because somebody might rob it. It is absolutely secure. In fact, Matthew 6:20, stockpile treasure in heaven, where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. So stockpile, store up treasure in heaven. Invest in heaven, because it's an investment, listen, that you cannot lose. And then there's this other thing that happens is, when you invest there, that Jesus tells us our heart follows. It's where we want to be. That same idea is found in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 6 says, give happily to those in need, and always be ready to share whatever God has given you. By doing this, you'll store up real treasure for yourself. There it is again. Store up treasures in heaven. It's the only safe investment for eternity. See, the challenge for us is to use the most of our money for something like this, while at the same time we all understand we need money to live on. We have to be able to provide for our daily needs. We need to discipline ourselves to save money to live out to the end of our life. But at the same time, the Bible tells us the most important thing that we can do is to make an investment in heaven. So listen, don't limit your investment to just 30 or 40 years down the road, but think longer term. Think thousands of years down the road. What can I do with my money and possessions that will make a difference in eternity? If you know me at all, you know I don't like to preach on money. I don't like to particularly preach on the topic of giving. Most of it is because I don't want people to feel bad, guilty, negative. I don't want them to have a bad view of the church, or to think that's all we ever talk about, because the truth is we rarely talk about it. But here's the thing that honestly, as a preacher, I have to worry about. If I don't encourage the people in my church to think about this, to give, to invest in heaven, then the honest truth is we're all going to end up on the other side someday. And there's going to be some of you that are going to walk up to me and you're going to go, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I know that we could store up treasure in heaven? Why didn't somebody tell me that? And Peter's going to say, well, didn't you understand that whole thing about laying up treasure in heaven? I mean, it was in the Bible there. And somebody's going to say, well, no, I didn't. Our pastor didn't want anyone to feel bad. He didn't want anybody to feel obligated. And so we just never made a big deal about offering. And our church really never saw it as a priority. We didn't talk about it. And I know what's going to happen next. People are going to start looking around going, where is he? Where's Greg? Where's our preacher? And people are going to be running off to, why didn't you tell us about this? I'm like, well, I knew about it. It's in there. You didn't know? Well, I didn't want to offend you. I didn't want to. Why didn't you offend us? Why didn't you tell us about this? I didn't know it would be here forever. See, when I understand this, when I understand that I'm not just giving away stuff, I'm storing it up, then it helps me to be content right here in life with the things that I have. It allows me to say, I really don't want a new car right now. I'm okay driving the one that I've got right here. Why are you so content? Because I've got plenty. I've got some here, and I've got, some over there. And every day I'm getting a little closer to moving to where I've stored some up, and I'm getting closer to heaven. And it's not, well, I don't want to get there anytime soon. I'm ready to go because I've got a plan. I've got something happening there. And so I become concerned. I'm not as worried about giving some of it away, but when I have the opportunity to give somebody that's in need, I want to be able to do that because I recognize that's helping not just somebody in need here, but it's helping me in the future. And so I want you to ask yourself honestly, what will your treasure in heaven look like? What will your treasure in heaven look like? Jesus one time said, if you've sacrificed, I will return it 100-fold and give you eternal life. In case you don't know, 100-fold is a 10,000% return. So when we're thinking about saving all you can, think long term. Think of it like an eternal account. What does your eternal account look like? Of course, we need to talk about some things a little closer here. Let's talk about saving for emergencies. You need to save for some emergencies because tomorrow, if you were to go to work and find out you've been laid off, let go, you're given your last check, how long? How long could you go? Or this week, if the car were to break down and you're looking at putting in a new transmission, or the clothes dryer goes out, is that a disaster for you? Or do you have some money set aside for emergencies? Again, as we've already talked about, most people don't have any or have enough. And I like that Financial Peace, Dave Ramsey, they recommend that you just immediately try to, or as quickly as you can, save $1,000 for those unforeseen expenditures. Put $1,000 back. However long it takes, you get to the point where you at least start by having an emergency savings account of $1,000. Now, will $1,000 cover every emergency? It won't. It just won't. There will be things that it won't cover. But people have actually researched this, and they've discovered that $1,000 will cover, catch this, 99% of all emergency expenses. It will cover 99% of the emergencies that you would have. So do whatever you can to make sure that you've got $1,000 put back for emergencies. Now, obviously, you need to grow that over the course of time. That's an immediate step. That's a baby step. But it keeps you from, when an emergency comes, you don't have to charge that, or maybe you don't have to ask your parents to borrow that money. You need to be able to access that money, but you don't want to make it too easy to get to. So save for emergencies. Of course, we all need to think about saving for retirement. Saving for retirement. We're told that over half of Americans have no retirement savings, have zero. In fact, the median amount, that's the 50th percentile mark, is only $5,000. So when we're talking about retirement savings, I'm not just talking about one of these days you just being able to quit a job and, golf or fish or, not work, just do whatever you want to do. But more than likely, there'll be a time where you just can't. You will not have the ability. Physically, you will not be able to work as hard as you were in earlier years. And you need to be able to sustain yourself. People are living longer than they used to, and we need to provide for that. And so if it's available to you, if you've got a workplace that provides it, either with a matching 401k or maybe it's a 403b, some kind of retirement, especially if they match funds, you make sure you take full advantage of that. That is free money. Take advantage of free money. And then don't touch it. Don't touch it unless it is just an absolute necessity. Put it in place. Make sure it's in a place that's hard to get. Save for retirement. And once you get those down, there ought to be a time where you save for some major expenses. Maybe some unexpected purchases, or maybe they are expected purchases. That way, instead of having to borrow money to buy your next car, you're able to pay for it in cash. Or maybe it's setting aside money for your child's college tuition. Or maybe you're looking forward to buying a house soon and you're setting aside a down payment for that. Set aside some money. Save for some major expenses. Now, if you struggle with that, let me tell you, I'm the chief sinner there. This is not something that's been easy for Andrea and I, but if you struggle with that, let me give you a couple of suggestions that have helped us. One, when it comes to savings, is make it as automatic as possible. In fact, when we really began to grow in the discipline of savings, it's when I used another institution. In fact, it's one that actually is for the benefit of planting churches. But they automatically, every month, withdraw some money out of my checking account. And it happens without me thinking about it. It happens and it goes away, and it is stockpiling, and it's being used. It's being used for some good purposes, and it's actually drawing better interest than my bank savings account. And so it just happens where it's automatically. It's automatic deduction for me, and it's a little harder for me to get to. I've gotten into it, and I've used it before, but I have to make a phone call, and it might take, a few hours for that to happen. And so maybe that's for you. Or one of the other things that helped us was when we paid off something. Maybe we finished paying off a car. And instead of just that money going back into our regular account, or maybe instead of it just going back to start a new payment or getting a new car, there was money we were able to set aside and begin to save. We would take that money that was the car payment or whatever, and we would begin to put it aside, and we would begin to put it into our savings account. Savings is about preparing for the future. We all probably need to be better at that. There are some of you that you've been doing this for a long time. And maybe there's some things that we've talked about. Maybe there's an area that you need to make sure that you've got savings for. Maybe this is new for you. Maybe you're just starting out on your own, and maybe it's time for you to set some disciplines in course. Let me tell you up front, the things that you do now are the things that become habits for us down the road. And so if you're just starting out a new career, a new job, you begin to set some right courses for how your money is spent and how it's saved and how it's used. Saving is just preparing for the future. So save all you can. Pray with me. Father, I thank you for just teaching us simple things in your word about things with our finances, things like saving. That saving is something that happens little by little. And that savings is something the wise do for the future. And so, Father, I'm praying for all of us that we would just be good stewards with what you have given us. We would be good managers, that we would set aside some for those expenditures that we know eventually are going to come around. But Father, we also want to be saving for the eternal future. And so, Father, I'm praying that you'd help us to think even further down the road, that God, we would save, that we would stock treasure in heaven. God, would you help us to have that kind of picture of our money that you have entrusted with? We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.